nature of how we do this may have made sense at one time, but good grief, there's got to be a way to simplify this, you know? There are, and one of the things I didn't say last night is that we're also dealing with this issue of value. Like Southern Hills is going to pay $60,000 to the annual conference, or should this year. We'll probably actually pay just the required items, which will be 18 or 19,000, would be my guess. But we're paying that, and part of what we're paying that for is to cover the salaries of these people at these different levels, whom we keep asking to come here to do things, and they never seem to be able to find the time in their schedule to come and show up to things. You know, like our 60th anniversary, there's a whole list of things, and we're kind of like, okay, you know, if we're gonna pay tens of thousands of dollars, you could show up from time to time, and that's happening kind of across the conference right now. So, well, I suppose it's really difficult to justify spending that much money for things like that when you don't see anything coming from it, while at the same time you're trying to find the money that you need to do the mission that your church is actually engaged in. And that's kind of what they're saying. For instance, one of the things that's come up is that, you know, we're paying like the salaries of district superintendents and the bishop and the conference staff and stuff like that. But if you go into another denomination, that even one that has bishops, that bishop's going to be appointed to a church. There's no reason that our bishops and our district superintendents can't actually be serving a church somewhere, which, you know, from which the major portion of their salary would come from the church that they're serving. So I think that we'll see some of those kinds of changes so that we can reduce the apportionment burden on the local church. Yeah, I was threatened with that this year. I should have brought the numbers, should have brought the new budget. They made a reduction, and I'm going to get these numbers wrong, so I'll try to get a hold of the budget. They made a reduction of something like 1% or 2% to personnel costs, and basically most of the reductions that they made came from ministry areas. So less money going into ministry, personnel and facility costs kind of staying the same. And you know, don't misunderstand. If I get that, I don't want to lay off people in my local church, and I understand that nobody else wants to lay anybody off either. You know, we want to be able to not make life hard for people because they're losing their jobs. I get that. The problem is, I think personally there's a better way to handle this, and I've tried to bring it up a lot, and I'll talk about that in a second. But if you put my church and I in a position to say, you know, you're either going to have to lay off the staff at your church or not send in the funds that we need to pay our staff. It's really hard for me to come to the church and say, we need to lay off our staff so that these people that we keep asking to come and help us that don't show up can get their salaries. It's just a difficult justification to make. And after going through that shortly after I got here, I won't do it again. So yeah, I was threatened this year with a move. They didn't even, here's the thing, we didn't pay any apportionments. What year would that have been? 2019, I think. I think that's right. We paid, they have what are called the starred items, which are a portion of that 60 grand for us that is considered mandatory. Predictably, it covers personnel costs at the conference. So we paid that in 2020 and in 2021, and that comes to just under 20 grand. And I expect we'll pay that this year. We may even be able to pay a little bit more than that this year. But when I was threatened with a move this year, my supervisor did not even know that we had made those payments in the last 2 years, so I had to share that information, and he was surprised by that. So I'm thinking there's probably more effective ways to do this than what's happening. And that's in stark contrast. You know, interestingly, if you caught the tone of the 2 weeks that we talked about this, my personal tone for the theological conversation is very much oriented to the direction the United Methodist Church is going, Did I tell you that I told you last night that the South Central jurisdiction made a resolution that no one will be prosecuted or defrocked for officiating weddings and stuff? Okay, that's very much the direction I think we need to go. When it comes to administrative issues, I think we've been moving in very much the direction we do not need to go. But I also think that we're going to have an opportunity to correct some of that for two reasons. One is that some of the churches that have been holding that kind of thing up are leaving the denomination. And the other is that I think we're going to end up, from a denominational perspective, in a financial position that it's not going to give us any choice. The bishops, there was so much frustration with the way the bishops had handled the pandemic in particular, that those apportionments. Has anybody ever seen, that maybe served on finance committee and seen the apportionment lists that we get sometimes? Okay, I know some of us have. They're parsed out by different line items, so you can tell how much each individual line item is costing us. One of those is the Episcopal Fund, which is the fund that is used to pay the bishops denominationally. As a whole, globally, the United Methodist Church only funded that fund by 40% last year, because in the reduction of the denominational budget, every item was reduced last year except for the Episcopal Fund, which increased. And the church said, yeah, no, I don't think we're going to do that. So the churches, in large part, only funded it to 40%, which means that then the denomination used its reserves to make up the difference, which is probably not the best practice. So I think some of that's going to change. Some people came up to me last night and said, man, you just don't expect that those kinds of problems and arguments are going to happen in a church. I think it's disheartening, but the simple truth, and you know this when you if you get asked to serve or volunteer to serve on one of the administrative boards in a church, you're going to find very quickly that a church is two things that you really don't want it to be. One is that it is an organization. Is it a church? Yes, but there's so much of the administration and operation of a church that matches any other nonprofit organization. So it is that. You have all the headaches of broken air conditioning units and stoves that go out and oven filtration systems that have to be replaced, just like you would in any other business. The other thing you realize when you serve in administration in a church is that a church, like every other organization, is made up of people. And much as we're supposed to love each other, and we do love each other, we just don't agree on things all the time. And mitigating those disagreements is so taxing and sometimes disheartening. And I think the reason, personally, that it becomes disheartening is because we're not just people, but people are emotional beings. And when we're talking about our church, we're talking about something that we usually hold near and dear to our hearts, which makes us more likely to be emotional about it. And sometimes, I actually had somebody come up to me. I said this in a sermon. Somebody came up to me a few weeks ago and told me about a conversation that they'd had with another church member years ago that evolved into a verbal argument, and said, I've reconciled with this person, but I'm just feeling bad about it. I don't think they probably handled it the way they should have, but I know I didn't handle it the way that I should have handled it, right? That happens. It happens to all of us. We get emotional about something, we'll leave and think, man, well, I sure could have handled that better, And so when you serve in administration, you end up seeing that. So it can be disheartening. But I also, all of that aside, think we have a real opportunity to leave something better for the generations that'll follow us. If we come through, we're coming through a time where we don't really have a lot of choice about restructuring our denomination. It's going to happen. It's out of necessity. Probably should have done it sooner. But if we can do it well and not shy away from it, we can leave something better for a better organizational structure for those who come after us. And I think that's going to end up being our task. All right, I'd like to actually get into chapter 31, if that's all right with y'all. But before I do you have any other thoughts about last night or the week before? No. We did not record either of those two meetings. And the first was the week before. Didn't stream that one because I wanted people to feel a little bit more freedom to ask questions without it being streamed. And then I've told several people this. Last night, I just wasn't entirely certain that I wanted the annual conference to have access to that whole thing. So, but I will answer any questions. You know, come and talk to me anytime, and I'll fill you in on things. Yeah. No. It was twice that, but no. It was 14 million. No, we don't know yet. We don't know yet. It was, the accounting was awful. And because of that, we didn't pay our apportionments because we couldn't. We didn't have it. But I'm not going to say that we wouldn't have made a decision as an administrative board or a church to withhold them, even if we could have paid them, until they could at least produce an audit. If we could have paid them, I'd have been a fan of doing one of two things. I'd have either put those in reserves until they could produce an audit, because sometimes not every mistake is nefarious. I get that. There may be a very good reason for things. There may be a very good reason for where this $14 million has come from. I want to presume positive intent, but we need the reason. I mean, we need to know what it is. So I would have been a fan, if we'd had the money, of setting it aside until the accounting practices were fixed and the information was there. Or some other churches took that money and just sent it directly to missional organizations that they chose to send it to. So Skyline in particular got a whole lot of money during that time because churches were saying, we're just going to send it here then, instead of sending it to the annual conference. Yeah. Okay, can is, yeah, I was going to say, can is that's a difficult question to answer. Can we? Yes. What are the consequences? Normally the minister gets reappointed. That's normally the consequence there. And I've been threatened with that twice now, 2 years in a row. So, the things I've told you are the same things I've told my district superintendent, that I'm not going to do that again. Now at the same time, again, for us, we didn't really have a choice about that. We didn't have the funds to pay it. But I don't know that we would have if the annual conference wasn't able to even produce an audit. And then when they did produce an audit, the audit for 2 years didn't make any sense. And when they were asked for clarification, they have been unwilling to provide it. That's just not a good business practice, and it's not a good way to try to relate to your churches. That's a difficult question to answer because we're in the process of trying. We have tried to call a called annual conference, I mentioned that last night, to deal with the finances, but then we found out the bishop is keeping that off the agenda. So our regular annual conference is going to be in May. I suspect that there will be a series of resolutions that we draw up to require a certain level of financial reporting, so that the annual conference will require that of the conference financial team with some pretty strict requirements. But where that goes from there, I don't know, because the problem that we're running into is that it's really difficult to enforce that because that requires the participation of the bishop, who, as of right now, continues to shut down all the conversation about that. That may lead to something else, but at present, I don't know what that is. There are other ways to affect that, and one of them is, on a larger scale, to continue to do what some of the churches have been doing and say, no, we're going to keep withholding our apportionments until you're willing to provide the level of information that we want. But that presumes then that the bishop will not reappoint those ministers. So let me tell you some more. Hey, Patrick, stop streaming this for a minute. So let me tell you some more.